Japan, A History in Art by Bradley Smith. We will be using this 1964 book as textbook for the next 10 weeks of this class. There are 10 chapters in all. We will spend 1 week for each chapter. Chapter 1, the Archaic period, before 552. Where did the Japanese people come from? Facts and legends, the mysterious bronze bells of the Yayoi period. Each time you hear an era name, underline it, and we will go over the dates in class, keeping in mind that some of the dates provided in this 1964 book are somewhat old and have been altered since then. And Yayoi period begins around 300 BC, just to take note. The giant tombs called Kofun, the gay, energetic, varied world of the Haniwa people and their horses, ducks and birds, the important role of the horse in a prehistoric age, the use of iron and development of the sword, which becomes both the instrument and symbol of power. Okay, and also keep in mind that there are 164 images provided in this book. My assistant Nicole has done her best to track down each of the images and insert it here into this video series, so they should pop up on the screen as we read through each of the chapters. So the first image is the head of the Haniwa figure. I will not read the blurb descriptions for the images, but hopefully we will be able to insert them into the video screen below the image so you can follow along. And again, the book link to the book I will provide in the description below so you can purchase it and follow along. It's an excellent, if outdated, book that is a good introduction to both the history of Japanese art and sort of general overview of Japanese history from antiquity all the way through the beginning of the Meiji period. The beginning. The specific origins of the ancestors of the present Japanese people are lost in the midst of time. Yet there is evidence that some of the islands of the Japanese archipelago were inhabited by primitive man as early as the Pleistocene period 1,000,000 years ago. Later, some 5,000 years before Christ, a culture was created known as Jōmon. The Jōmon people left examples of distinct type of pottery characterized by a coiled rope pattern and created many strange figurines called dogu. So images 2, 3, 4, and 5 are dogu figurines, fired clay from the late Jōmon period. They were in the shape of people and animals and are believed to be representations of their kami. And the original text here says gods, gods. Again and again, the word God and gods appears. But this is a bit misleading, so I've replaced all gods with kami, or sort of spirits is one way to translate kami of the Shinto native Japanese religion. These early ancestors of the Japanese people lived in a beautiful world in miniature. Sharply etched peaks rose from gentle wooded hills. Fertile valleys formed a green mat to the sea. All was crowned by the towering perfection of Mount Fuji. Deer, bear, and boar roamed the wooded slopes. The coastal waters sheltered shrimp, langoust, eel, octopus, and an abundant variety of fish. From the high snow, sparkling streams became swift rivers and blue lakes. Springs, hot and cold, flowed from the hills. Nature left a permanent imprint on Japanese culture. Shinto, written with kami no michi, the first form of worship, is based upon awe, respect, and affection for the elements. Forces for good and evil were believed to live in the wind, in the rain, in the mountains, and in the sea. With the abundance of water, the Japanese came to revere cleanliness. The ritual cleansing, which in Japanese is misogi, became part of their worship. The early legends of Japan telling of the birth of the islands were part of the Shinto form of worship known as the Way of the Gods. They tell of the miraculous creation of the islands by Izanagi and Izanami, who were the parents of the sun goddess, Amaterasu, and of many gods and goddesses who controlled the moon, fire, wind, and other elements of nature. As the early tribes slowly moved from nomadic hunting to agriculture, the legends of the original Japan were handed down from one generation to another by word of mouth. And on these 2 pages, we have more stylized dogu or doll-like figurines dating from the late Jōmon period. One you will notice has a concave face with a large nose, and the unique eye treatment becomes apparent in close-up detail in the figure on the right. The mysterious bells. Bronze was the first metal to enter Japan. And again, if there's any information in this book that is not historically accurate or that has been debunked or disproved since 1964. We will go over that in class and make corrections. Bronze was the first metal to enter Japan. From it, in the 1st or 2nd century before Christ, bell-shaped objects were created, and on them were etched hunting and fishing scenes, outline pictures of tortoises, lizards, birds, and other animals and insects indigenous to the islands. Some archaeologists have conjectured that they were used in religious ceremonies, others that they were simply objects of beauty or wealth. The bell-shaped bronzes, each with a curved handle, range in size from less than a foot to 4 feet in height. Their shape may be of Chinese or Korean origin, for similar objects have been found in northern Korea. But the illustrations showing vivid scenes of life in the Yayoi period are distinctly Japanese. And image 6 here at the bottom of this spread is of a bell, or dotaku is the word in Japanese, from the mid-Yayoi period, made of bronze. The most complete record of a distinctive early Japanese culture, and the one that teaches most about life in the late Archaic period, is the giant tomb called Kofun. Built in the shape of gigantic keyhole, these elaborate burial chambers were surrounded by hundreds of hand-fashioned clay cylinders called haniwa. 3 haniwa grave figures, these are 3 heads made of fired clay from the mid-Kofun period. Of simple design in the earliest tombs, within a short time these cylinders, these haniwa, became more detailed and representational. The clay figures that decorated the tombs of rulers showed not only the various types of people then residing in the islands, noblemen, foot soldiers, priestesses, and peasants, but also their horses, chickens, deer, ducks, and birds. In character and design, these figurines, these haniwa, were wholly Japanese. Rich in humor and variety, they show people of varying stations, or mibung, as we say in Japanese, and different professions. In addition to people, houses of the period can be reconstructed from the clay miniature of them which were placed on top of each tomb. Many of the farmhouses in Japan today are constructed in the same fashion. As mirrored by the haniwa figurines, the people of Japan lived in an active and energetic society. This is a very distinctive look, and many traditional houses are very similar to this. The coming of the sword. Iron replaced bronze in Japan during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, and the sword evolved into the most important weapon of conquest. Throughout Japan, hordes of aborigines were driven north by men with swords as the early clans began to form. Because of its great value, for there were few swords in these early days, the weapon became important not only for defense and conquest, but also as a ceremonial object. It appeared as one of the earliest symbols of power in Japanese tradition. The son of the gods Izanami and Izanagi, Susanoo, used an inferior saber to kill an 8-forked serpent, and within the serpent found a great sharp sword. This sword, it is said, became part of the imperial family regalia and a symbol of power. Warriors usually carried a short sword with a large, easy-to-grasp handle, but they also knew and used a longer blade. Fighting men of the period may at times have carried both. By AD 300, most of the tribes had been joined in a confederation, and as the Aborigines were conquered, many groups moved from the coastal settlements to the plains in the region of Yamato. As the welding of tribal groups continued and a military tradition developed, these early Japanese became well enough organized to extend their control to part of southern Korea. The first horseman, as important as the sword to the prehistoric Japanese, was the horse. The small, sturdy Japanese steeds probably came from Mongolia via Korea. There is no record of just when horses first arrived in Japan, but there must have been a great influx between the beginning of the Bronze period and the early Asuka period. The indications of this are the drawings on the mysterious Dotoku bells, which we already saw, which show primitive hunters on foot, and reproductions of clay haniwa horses, usually shown with saddle and bridle. The beauty of the clay haniwa horses was celebrated in early legend. The Nihon Shoki, the first chronicle of Japan, recounts the tale of a horseman called Hakusong, who while riding by moonlight met a strange horseman mounted on a handsome red charger. Hakusong rode alongside, and the rider of the strange horse, divining his wish for the red steed, stopped and exchanged horses. Happy at having such a wonderful horse, Hakuson rode home and placed him in the stable. The next morning, his beautiful red horse had become a Haniwa horse of clay. He went back along the trail which led him by the Honda imperial tomb and found his own horse standing among the clay Haniwa horses. That dancing was an important part of the life of the early Japanese is vividly shown in the action and emotion of these highly distinctive, beautifully articulated dancing men. Earliest historical accounts indicate that dancing was an important part of the burial ceremonies. It was an important activity at early festivals celebrating the planting or reaping of crops, and was probably an integral part of rituals relating to fertility and magic. The Haniwa figurines shown here show important class distinctions. Some men represent nobles, other warriors, and peasants. Clothing ranges from loose balloon-legged trousers, known as hakama, with tight-fitting jackets worn by men, to woven skirts and narrow-sleeved blouses, completely unlike the loose kimonos worn centuries later for women. There is nothing derivative from any other cultures in the simple Haniwa figurines. They can be termed a natural expression of the Japanese. Painted faces, familiar animals. The sculptors of this era favored simplicity of form, yet achieved an emotional quality, often of awareness. This may be seen in the eyes of the figurines, though the eyes were simple holes cut directly into the clay. But their use of color was realistic. Pink and red designs were sometimes painted on faces and bodies, just as later histories tell of people who painted themselves. Domestic animals were an important part of life in the prehistoric period, for in addition to chickens and dogs, men are sometimes shown with a trained falcon on the arm. In reproducing familiar animals in clay, Haniwa artists strove for the essential quality rather than the external detail. Birds, ducks, dogs, horses, monkeys, bears, deer, and chickens, even though the representation is more abstract than realistic, are readily recognized. And that's the end of chapter 1. And we will discuss this chapter in detail in class. And for the following week, we will do the Asuka period for chapter 2. I will see you all in class. Goodbye.